They looked like ordinary teenagers. Young, innocent, and full of life. But behind their faces hid something far more sinister. This is the Murder Maze, and today, we're uncovering the dark secrets of teenage killers you've probably never heard of. Imagine a city gripped by fear. A brutal child murderer is on the loose. But what if I told you the killer wasn't an adult? He was a teenager. We're diving into the twisted story of Jesse Pomeroy, America's youngest serial killer. Jesse Pomeroy was born in 1859 in Charlestown, Massachusetts. From the moment he entered the world, he was different. His right eye was milky white due to a birth defect, which made him a target for bullying. But instead of breaking him, the bullying fueled something dark inside him. By the time he was a child, Jesse developed a fascination with violence. He tortured animals, cutting, stabbing, and watching them suffer. This wasn't just childhood mischief. It was the early sign of something far more sinister. His father, Thomas Pomeroy, was a violent man who regularly beat Jesse. Some say this abuse played a role in what happened next. But was Jesse a victim? Or was he simply born evil? In 1871, when Jesse was just 12 years old, young boys started going missing in the South Boston area. Some returned with horrifying stories. They described being taken to isolated places, stripped, whipped with belts and sticks, and cut with knives. The victims all gave the same description of their attacker: a teenage boy with one milky eye. It didn't take long for people to suspect Jesse Pomeroy. In 1872, he was arrested for the brutal assaults. Since he was only 12, the court showed leniency. Instead of prison, Jesse was sent to a reform school for juvenile offenders. The judge ordered that he stay there until he was 18, but Jesse had other plans. After just a year and a half, he convinced the authorities to release him early for good behavior. That was their first mistake. By 1874, Jesse and his mother had moved to South Boston. She thought her son had changed, but deep down, Jesse hadn't learned anything, except how to be more dangerous. Just a few months after his release, a 10-year-old girl named Katie Curran disappeared. Her family searched everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. Then, another horror struck the city. A 4-year-old boy, Horace Millen, was found brutally murdered near the marshes. His body was covered in stab wounds. His throat had been slit so deeply that his head was nearly severed. Boston was terrified, and when police started asking questions, one name kept coming up: Jesse Pomeroy. The police brought Jesse in for questioning. When they searched his mother's store, they found something chilling: a blood-stained knife. Even worse, when they checked the store's basement, they discovered the decomposing body of Katie Curran. Jesse didn't resist. In fact, he confessed almost immediately. He described the killings in shocking detail, as if he were talking about an ordinary day. There was no remorse, no fear, just cold, calculated evil. But there was one disturbing detail. Jesse refused to explain why he did it. At just 14 years old, Jesse Pomeroy stood trial for murder. The courtroom was packed. People wanted to see what kind of child could commit such monstrous crimes. The jury didn't take long to decide. Jesse was guilty. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging. But there was a problem. Jesse was still a minor, and many believed it was wrong to execute a child. After much debate, the governor reduced his sentence to life in solitary confinement. And so, in 1876, Jesse Pomeroy was locked away in the Charlestown State Prison, where he would spend over 40 years in isolation. For decades, Jesse lived in complete isolation. He tried to escape multiple times but never succeeded. He spent his time reading, writing, and even studying foreign languages, but no amount of learning could erase his crimes. In his later years, he was finally allowed to join the general prison population. He spent the rest of his life behind bars and died in 1932 at the age of 72. Jesse Pomeroy's case raises chilling questions. Was he a product of abuse, or was he simply born a killer? His story is a reminder that evil doesn't always wear the face of an adult. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters walk among us as children. Number 2. An 11-year-old girl calmly walks up to a mother and asks, "Do you miss your son?" But what if I told you that same girl was the one who took his life? Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, 1957, in Newcastle, England. Her childhood was anything but normal. Her mother, Betty Bell, was a sex worker and often left Mary in the care of strangers. There were rumors that Betty even tried to kill Mary multiple times, once by making her swallow pills. Mary grew up in a violent home, and by the age of 10, she was already showing disturbing behavior. She attacked other children, attempted to strangle classmates, and seemed to have no sense of right and wrong. But no one could have predicted what she would do next. On May 25, 1968, the day before Mary's 11th birthday, 4-year-old Martin Brown was found dead in an abandoned house. His body had no obvious injuries, leading investigators to believe he had died in an accident. But something was off. Nearby, police found scribbled notes that read, "I murder so that I may come back. We did murder Martin Brown." At first, the notes were dismissed as a cruel prank, but they were only the beginning. 2 months later, on July 31, 1968, 3-year-old Brian Howe went missing. His body was later discovered in a wasteland near his home. This time, there was no doubt, it was murder. Brian had been strangled, and what made it even more disturbing was that the killer had returned to the body after death. They had carved the letter M into his stomach and cut his hair. The level of cruelty shocked investigators. Witnesses told police that Mary Bell had been seen playing with Brian earlier that day. Even more chilling, after his death, Mary went to Brian's mother and asked her, "Do you miss Brian?" That was the moment people started to suspect something was seriously wrong with Mary. Police began questioning local children. One girl, Norma Bell, no relation to Mary, broke down and revealed everything. She told police that Mary had been obsessed with violence, that she had strangled Brian while laughing, and that she had returned to his body later to carve into him. Mary was arrested, but she showed no fear. Instead, she smirked at officers. During questioning, she gave conflicting stories, sometimes blaming Norma, sometimes admitting parts of the crime, but never showing remorse. It wasn't until investigators found Mary's handwriting matched the notes left at the Martin Brown crime scene that they knew they had their killer. Mary Bell's trial began in December 1968. The world watched in shock. How could an 11-year-old girl commit such brutal crimes? Her defense team argued that she had a troubled childhood and didn't understand what she was doing. But the prosecution painted a different picture, one of a young sociopath who killed for the thrill of it. Norma Bell was also on trial but was ultimately found not guilty. Mary, however, was convicted of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. The judge believed she had a personality disorder that made her unable to control her actions. Her sentence? Indefinite detention. She was sent to Red Bank Secure Unit, a facility for troubled youth. Mary spent years in different institutions. As she grew older, she was closely monitored, but her behavior remained unpredictable. Then, in 1980, at just 23 years old, Mary Bell was released from prison. The British government granted her a new identity, allowing her to live a life free from the shadow of her crimes. But here's the shocking part. Mary later had a daughter, and for years, her child had no idea of her mother's past. It wasn't until journalists exposed her true identity that the world learned Mary Bell was living among them. The public was outraged, but legally, nothing could be done. Mary Bell and her daughter were placed under lifelong anonymity protection, meaning no one could reveal their whereabouts or new identities. Mary Bell's case raises disturbing questions. Was she born evil, or did her traumatic childhood shape her into a killer? And if someone commits murder as a child, do they deserve a second chance? Number 3. A crowded shopping center. A mother looks away for just a moment, and in that moment, her 2-year-old son vanishes, never to return home alive. What makes this case even more horrifying? The killers weren't adults. They weren't even teenagers. They were 2 10-year-old boys. It was February 12, 1993. Denise Bulger had taken her 2-year-old son, James, to the New Strand shopping center in Bootle, England. While she was distracted at a butcher shop, James wandered just a few feet away. But that was enough. In those few moments, 2 10-year-old boys, Jon Venables and Robert Thompson, spotted him. They led him away. It was a sight no one thought twice about. 2 slightly older boys walking with a toddler. But James wasn't their little brother. He was their prey. Venables and Thompson had already been at the shopping center that day, looking for a victim. They had tried to lure away another child earlier but failed. Then they saw James. Security cameras captured the moment James was taken. The footage would later become one of the most chilling images in true crime history. Tiny James, in his blue coat, walking hand in hand with his killers. They walked for over 2 miles, leading James through busy streets. Several people saw them. Some even stopped to ask if James was lost, but the boys claimed he was their little brother. No one intervened. Then, they reached an isolated railway track. What happened next is almost too horrific to describe. At the railway track, Venables and Thompson tortured James. They threw bricks at him. They kicked him. They beat him with an iron bar. They dropped heavy stones on his tiny body. Then, they did something even more horrifying. They took paint that they had stolen earlier and smeared it into James's eyes. Finally, they placed his lifeless body on the railway tracks and covered him with bricks and rubble, hoping a train would run over him and make his death look like an accident. It was an act of pure, unimaginable cruelty. 2 days later, James's body was found by a train conductor. His injuries were so severe that police at first thought he had been hit by a train while alive. But soon, the horrifying truth came out. James had been tortured and murdered before being left on the tracks. The entire country was in shock. Who could have done this to an innocent toddler? When police reviewed the security footage from the shopping center, they saw 2 small figures leading James away. It didn't take long for them to identify the boys. Jon Venables and Robert Thompson, both just 10 years old when police arrested the boys. Their reactions were completely different. Jon Venables broke down immediately. He cried, asked for his mother, and insisted he had wanted to take James home. But Robert Thompson was cold and emotionless. He remained calm, even smiling at times. During questioning, Venables cracked. He admitted everything. He told police, "We did it. We killed him." The nation was horrified. These were not grown men. They were children. Children who had committed one of the most brutal murders in British history. The trial of Jon Venables and Robert Thompson began in November 1993. It was the first time in over a century that such young defendants had been tried for murder in an adult court. The media frenzy was overwhelming. The public wanted justice for James. When the verdict was finally announced, both boys were found guilty of murder. They became the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. But their sentence was shocking. Just 8 years in a juvenile detention center. Many believed it wasn't enough for such a horrific crime. In 2001, after serving only 8 years, both Jon Venables and Robert Thompson were released. They were given new identities and placed under lifelong anonymity protection. Thompson disappeared from the public eye. No one knows where he is today. But Venables? That's a different story. After his release, Venables was arrested multiple times. In 2010, he was caught with child abuse material on his computer and sent back to prison. Then, in 2018, he was arrested again for possessing even more disturbing content. Despite his crimes, the government continues to protect his identity. The murder of James Bulger remains one of the most haunting crimes in history. It forces us to ask, how young is too young to be truly evil? Can a child be a monster? And did justice really serve James Bulger? What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Number 4. He was just 15 years old, a quiet boy with a love for guns, violent music, and explosives. But on May 20, 1998, Kip Kinkel's name would become infamous. He didn't just kill, he planned it, he relished it, and he showed no remorse. Kipland Philip Kinkel was born on August 30, 1982, in Springfield, Oregon. His parents, Bill and Faith Kinkel, were respected members of their community. Both worked as teachers. They wanted the best for Kip, but something about him was different. From a young age, Kip struggled with learning disabilities. He was diagnosed with dyslexia, which made school difficult for him. He often felt like a failure, especially compared to his older sister, who excelled academically. His parents tried to help, but Kip had other interests, dark ones. He became obsessed with bombs, guns, and violent movies. By middle school, he was already showing signs of aggression, often getting into fights and fantasizing about killing. Kip's obsession with violence wasn't just a phase, it was an addiction. He idolized mass shooters, collected books on explosives, and listened to music filled with violent lyrics. At 12, he was caught shoplifting CDs about explosives. At 14, he told a classmate he wanted to kill everyone and watch them die. People noticed his strange behavior, but no one realized how dangerous he really was. His father, Bill, believed discipline was the answer. He tried to control Kip's fascination with weapons, even forbidding him from getting a gun. But Kip's mother, Faith, was softer. She thought giving him what he wanted would help. So, despite his troubling behavior, his parents eventually allowed him to own guns. That decision would prove to be fatal. On May 19, 1998, Kip was suspended from school. He had been caught with a stolen handgun in his locker. His father was furious. That night, Bill Kinkel told Kip they needed to talk about his future. Kip had already made up his mind. As his father sat at the kitchen table, Kip grabbed his Ruger .22 rifle, pointed it at the back of his father's head, and pulled the trigger. Bill Kinkel never saw it coming. Hours later, when his mother Faith returned home, Kip greeted her at the door. She asked where Bill was. Kip told her he loved her, then shot her in the face. As she lay bleeding, he shot her again, and again, and again. By the time he stopped, he had fired 6 bullets into her body. But he wasn't done yet. The next morning, May 20th, Kip Kinkel left his home and drove to Thurston High School. In his backpack, he carried 3 guns and over 1,000 rounds of ammunition. At 7:55 a.m., he walked into the school cafeteria, pulled out a .22 caliber rifle, and started shooting. The first shot hit 16-year-old Ben Walker, killing him instantly. The next shot hit 17-year-old Michael Nicolausen, who later died from his injuries. Chaos erupted. Students ran, screamed, and dove under tables. But Kip kept firing. He shot 24 more students, hitting some multiple times. Then, his rifle jammed. Enraged, he pulled out a pistol and continued firing. But this time, students fought back. Several boys tackled him to the ground, pinning him down until police arrived. As officers handcuffed him, Kip had only one thing to say: "Just kill me." At the police station, Kip confessed everything. He told detectives how he had killed his parents, how he had planned the school shooting, and how he wished he could have killed more people. When asked why he did it, his answer was chilling. "I had to." There was no remorse, no regret, just cold, calculated violence. Kip Kinkel's trial was one of the most shocking in Oregon's history. His defense argued that he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. They claimed he heard voices telling him to kill, but the prosecution had a different argument. Kip knew exactly what he was doing. He had planned everything. He had enjoyed the murders, and he had no remorse. In November 1999, Kip Kinkel pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and 26 counts of attempted murder. The judge sentenced him to 112 years in prison with no possibility of parole. To this day, Kip remains behind bars. He has never been released, and he never will be. Kip Kinkel's story is terrifying because it forces us to ask, what turns a teenager into a killer? Was it mental illness? A broken home? Or was he simply born to kill? April 20th, 1999. It started as a normal school day at Columbine High, but by the time it ended, 15 people were dead, 24 were wounded, and America was changed forever. 2 teenage gunmen, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, walked into their school, armed to the teeth, with one goal: total destruction. Columbine, Colorado, was a picture-perfect American suburb. Good schools, safe neighborhoods, and families living the American dream. But beneath that perfect image, darkness was brewing. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were high school seniors. To the outside world, they were just 2 ordinary kids. But in reality, they had been planning something horrific for over a year. Eric was the leader, charismatic, intelligent, but deeply sadistic. He kept a journal filled with disturbing rants about wanting to kill and destroy. He saw himself as superior to everyone, cold, calculating, and fueled by hatred. Dylan, on the other hand, was different. He was quiet, introverted, and deeply depressed. He felt like an outcast, unloved and unwanted. While Eric wanted to destroy, Dylan wanted to die. Together, they were the perfect storm. In the years leading up to the massacre, Eric and Dylan gave plenty of warning signs, but no one took them seriously. They posted violent threats online. They made disturbing videos, talking about killing their classmates. They wrote in their journals about how much they hated the world. In 1998, they were arrested for breaking into a van and stealing electronics. As punishment, they had to attend a diversion program. But behind closed doors, their plan for mass murder was already in motion. They called it NBK, short for Natural Born Killers, named after the violent movie they idolized. And they weren't planning just a school shooting. They were planning a bombing, a massacre, and a final act of terror that would leave hundreds dead. At 11:19 a.m., they started their killing spree outside the school. Their first victims were Rachel Scott and Richard Castaldo, who were sitting on the grass eating lunch. Eric shot Rachel in the head, killing her instantly. Richard was hit multiple times but survived. Then, they moved toward the west entrance. Daniel Rohrbaugh, 15, was gunned down as he tried to flee. Next, they shot and killed teacher Dave Sanders, who had been helping students escape. At 11:24 a.m., they entered the school library. This was where the worst of the massacre took place. Inside the library, dozens of students were hiding under tables. Eric and Dylan stormed in, laughing, taunting, and picking their victims at random. They executed 17-year-old Cassie Bernal after asking her if she believed in God. They shot Isaiah Shoels, the only black student in the room, while making racist comments. They killed 5 more students in the next few minutes. At 11:35 a.m., they left the library, leaving behind a scene of pure horror. 10 students lay dead, and many others were wounded. For nearly 30 more minutes, Eric and Dylan wandered through the school, shooting randomly, setting off small explosives, and trying to start more fires. But their massacre was losing steam. At 12:08 p.m., they walked back to the library, sat down, and put their guns to their heads. In one final moment, they both pulled the triggers. The rampage was over. In the hours after the shooting, SWAT teams stormed the school, helping survivors and searching for more attackers. The death toll was staggering: 13 dead, 24 wounded. The country was in shock. How could 2 teenagers commit such a horrific act? What went wrong? Investigations revealed chilling details. Eric had been planning the massacre for over a year. His online threats had been ignored. His journal was filled with plans for mass murder. The warning signs had been there, but no one had acted. The Columbine massacre changed everything. Schools across the U.S. introduced stricter security measures. Police changed how they responded to school shootings. Parents and teachers became more aware of bullying and mental health issues. But perhaps the most chilling legacy? Eric and Dylan inspired a new generation of killers. School shooters across the world, from Virginia Tech to Sandy Hook, cited Columbine as their inspiration. It was a tragedy that never truly ended. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were not bullied kids who snapped. They were not victims. They were cold-blooded killers who wanted to be remembered. But the real lesson of Columbine? We need to pay attention to the warning signs before it's too late.